Emergency meeting. Volition is officially dead. It's over. Tyron will never get his desk. I was in the middle of editing my final Saints Row reboot video where I was going to elaborate on the state of Saints Row, Deep Silver, and Volition, but this is a complete blindside. So let me just roughly say what I was going to say in that video. I don't know how anyone could be hopeful for this series anymore. They're not going to reboot the game again, and Volition is no longer with Deep Silver, the IP holders. The IP holders who insisted that the game be about friendship and himbos and the gig economy and hashtag that's relatable AF. And teal. Deep Silver really pushed the color teal for branding. I gotta make this clear, for as much as we all want to blame Volition, which we totally can for shoehorning in that awful combat system that they refused to let die with AOM, Deep Silver ultimately calls the shots for what the game is. Saints Row does not exist until they ask for one to be made. Whether they ask Volition or some other studio, they call the shots for what their IP is ultimately about. After all, it's literally their property. Volition wanted the reboot to be about gangs. Some of us in the core community were personally told early on that they were setting out to make Saints Row 2.5. But Deep Silver stepped in and said no. That kind of subject matter doesn't sell games. Water it all down and make it about friendship. There's so much to be said about that, I'm only scratching the surface. If you guys want a remaster of the old games, it's entirely up to Deep Silver, and they just don't believe there's money to be made with it. This is just this one CM's opinion, but it's nearly verbatim for every excuse I've ever heard for why they just won't do it. Too long didn't read, they just don't think there's enough money to be made to make it worth the effort. I mean, of course, we would argue that if presented to a new audience, modern gamers would love a remaster of the OG games as much as the fans would. But of course, they don't give a shit and they won't admit that. They will just claim that the community shifted interest, so that's why they must meet these new expectations. They will never admit to their investors that they've done a bad job with modern Saints Row. It all comes down to what they think will bring in the most money. Saints Row fans are not the priority. In fact, now that they're starting to work on the Saints Row 2 patch again after all this time, there's some internal dialogue happening around the budget for it. How much more work is needed and if it's even worth it. That's not to say it's cancelled, but... And that's basically where my old script stops because now the studio Deep Silver hired to complete the patch has shut down. Volition is closing doors. So what does that tell you? Now, I had planned to just keep it vague about those budgeting concerns, but now it probably doesn't matter. They were concerned about issues regarding updated UI, unlock screens, UGC, QA testing, and more importantly, there was a growing concern about the budget for dedicated Steam servers for co-op and multiplayer. That was apparently looking to be rather costly for them. I even heard they were looking into using Epic Online Services instead of Steam. The word around Deep Silver is that they wanted it out ASAP. But that means ASAP or we're shelving this shit. How much more work is exactly needed to get this thing done? And the truth is, they haven't been able to get a clear answer about that. Not good. It could just be a coincidence that the day after the Steam sale ends, Volition is canned, because it really looks like the Embracer bubble is bursting all around. But in regards to the Saints Row 2 patch, maybe they're also using that data to say a free patch for a 15-year-old game is no longer worth funding, because obviously the gaming community is no longer interested in Saints Row, right? It couldn't be because they ruined the series. Well guys, I'm just going to leave you with this. I was a part of a group that was helping out with the Saints Row 2 patch. I documented bugs, wrote reports, and gave my input about enhancements and how the game can be improved. My NDA expired and they wanted me to sign a 10-year NDA to continue my efforts to help out. And I refused to re-sign. Signing that would mean I couldn't tell you guys anything. I have played the patch and progress was going quite well for a while. That's what made me so confident that this thing was going to be released eventually. But this whole mess with Embracer? This truly puts things in limbo. The facts are this. Deep Silver still owns the Saints Row IP. The Saints Row reboot could still have a sequel produced. The Saints Row 2 patch could still be in the works. Volition dying doesn't really matter all that much. In fact, the core group of people that were working on the Saints Row 2 patch were hired independently anyway. Volition wasn't really going to use their manpower for it until they were done with the reboot. And ironically, the moment they get done with it, they shut down. So is the patch still coming? I don't know. People who have worked close with it don't know. It would be tragic if we never saw it. But that's up to Deep Silver now. And I'm not really hopeful about that. As I've stated, with the budgeting concerns, it sounded like they were looking for a way out of it anyway. And well, maybe they got it. I personally know that Idle Ninja, as sick as he was on his deathbed, worked really, really hard on this patch. He cared so much about the Saints Row community. Saints Row fans were like a family to him, and he knew his contributions to this game would make all of our lives a little brighter. I got to see his love for all of us firsthand, but I often forget you guys are left in the dark about this stuff. This patch means so much, and I hope it continues. I hope they're able to fulfill Idle Ninja's legacy. But that's up to Deep Silver.